Have you ever been accused of using a child as a human shield? Have you ever accused anybody of using a child as a human shield? First, you gotta define what a human shield is. See, I started this looking for something specific. There's this book that was written by this journalist around the time that I was being reprogrammed out of having a legacy in line with journalists. And it discusses how when Barack Obama became president, one of the first things he did is he created a position of a cyber czar. And that the person he appointed to head up a very special commission regarding so called cybersecurity had been arrested for theft, and that had not been factored into an evaluation of his fitness to perform the role, as well as other matters related to lack of qualification in specific kinds of certification regarding his capacity to perform the job. And I'm not somebody that has a huge amount of experience with cybersecurity, but I come from a family that does. And I know enough to know that certification in the course of qualifying to either use programs or if you're a software developer to be a part of upgrades or changes to specific software engineering or software development regimes is very important. That the legacy is important for establishing authentication. And when new people come in, they need to get certification, and their certification needs to have grounding in order to make sure that that's established and set. She put into this work she's done, I've got it here, this book I found, this concern she had regarding his certification. I was more concerned about the 4 shirts that he stole, because that's the kind of thing that I know as someone who used to teach young men, including young men that came from what some would classify as a troubled background, that one of the ways that gangs recruit is they require you to get busted. And then when you get busted, you keep your mouth shut, you do your time. That gives you a particular kind of credit in the community, so to speak, or in the gang. And what they don't usually tell you, unless you get really, 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 really good lawyers to maybe give you some inside information, is that once you get busted and you get that bail bond, and then you get hooked up with that lawyer, and then you go to court, they got a whole bunch of documentation somebody else can flip for some very, very high stakes deals for a long time. So it makes a difference when years down the road, that person, me, who used to teach those young men who are being attempted for recruitment into actual gangs, and not only that, are living in a life where, based upon the proximity to gangs and the fact that there is a culture of glamorizing gang involvement, are constantly being lured into situations where they're supposed to see their loyalty to some form of gang as being a sign of manhood, including a manhood in the stead of any other possibility they could have, because of various reasons. And sometimes those reasons can include actual political discernment that the structure and the system is corrupt, or maybe the structure and the system is completely contrary to what they understand to be a legitimate or ethical way of being, especially and increasingly if their culture has been defamed to the point where they cannot acknowledge the possibility of being who they are within their own culture and then finding some sort of social or political power, because the system's so corrupt and the system's so defamatory that it is as if you have to internalize the defamation, become a caricature of yourself, and then project that caricature onto what is considered to be the legitimate society, the one that got counted, the one that got accepted, the one that's able to get their resource needs met without having to show loyalty to a rival gang. And so there's legitimate political critique from a variety of perspectives about the system overall. Gang impressment seems a lot more viable. What do you do if somebody starts trying to normalize the processes of gang impressment by infiltrating the government that's already corrupt with it without cracking down on the corruption. Well, that's exactly what we got right now because I was looking for one thing, but this is what I found instead. Among the firm's other celebrity terrorist clients, 17 Yemenis held at the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. The law firm employed dozens of radical attorneys, such as, then they named the attorneys, to provide the enemy combatants with more than 3,000 hours of pro bono representation. Then it names the firm. Co-authored one of three petitioners' briefs filed in the then they named the case, detainee case, and secured victories for several other Gitmo enemy combatants in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Author went on to publish a book of poetry, names the book, dedicated to the suspected terrorist. Then he ends up identifying by name some of the suspected terrorists. This is what she says. How sweet. One of the class of Yemeni Gitmo detainees that the author described as gentle, thoughtful young men was released in 2005, only to blow himself up, gently and thoughtfully, of course, in a truck bombing in Mosul, Iraq in 2008, killing 13 soldiers from the 2nd Iraqi Army Division and seriously wounding 42 others. The Senate shrugged at the glaring conflict of interest Attorney General Holder presents in handling Gitmo legal issues. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Kukulu, author of Inside Gitmo, The True Story Behind the Myths of Guantanamo Bay, makes the ethical problem plain. This is a quote. As a senior partner, he undoubtedly had significant input on what kind of charity cases his firm picked up. He surely knew that dozens of lawyers from his firm were among the 500 plus civilian lawyers representing the 244 or so remaining detainees, on top of military court-appointed defenders. Even now, his Covington colleagues continue to allege rampant torture at Gitmo. They're fighting hard to have detainees tried through the U.S. court system, essentially given the same rights as U.S. citizens, and their arguments and plans hinge largely on having Holder issue a bad report card. Recent polls indicate that at least half of Americans disagree with affording the detainees legal rights on U.S. soil. Will they have the same access to Holder's ears as former colleagues do? I bring this up because I've looked at the list of alleged attorneys addressing matters at Guantanamo Bay, and it is harrowing. It is harrowing because the pro bono rate would most likely reflect what would be considered the rate that they would charge an actual client. And so the pro bono donated or in some way provided fees associate with the pro bono legal representation is very, very substantial. These are lawyers, some of whom are from very, very established firms, ones that have a long-term legacy, including legacies that intersect with the corporate world, around very high-profile clients internationally, people that move a lot of money on a daily basis, including people that move a lot of money on a daily basis in very, very high-risk scenarios, including in high-risk scenarios that could be to the advantage of one group of investors in one manner versus another group of investors in another manner, if it's allowed to be leveraged in a manner that could maybe take a hit somewhere in order to allow for some sort of transfer of assets in order to create the kind of volatility that can make those big bucks at those times that everybody's looking for, right? Nobody wants to talk about it like that. Why would a man purporting himself to be a constitutional lawyer, not just a lawyer, by the way, but a teacher? He taught constitutional law at an elite private university. He made closing Guantanamo Bay one of his major campaign issues before he became president, and he just didn't do it. Not only did he not do it, but I have another book of a man who was an Army reservist, who was called up with his Army Reserve unit to be guards at Guantanamo Bay. He discusses how he and his specifically racialized, engineered unit were deployed to Gitmo to be set up and ambushed into having to de-escalate scenes connected to prisoners that had been intentionally triggered and tortured into creating a scene merely so they could create completely fraudulent reports through the head of the base that were allowed to circulate through the media. Why would anybody do that? See, this was before Barack Obama even became president. This is a very important matter. It's very heavy on my mind right now. It's literally that direct. And so now we have a situation where that same president who intentionally hired somebody completely illegitimate when it comes to being qualified for cybersecurity, but also setting in motion conditions whereby people who wanted legitimate involvement with and through the cybersecurity sector were intentionally sabotaged and attempted for programming into just doing what they were told, regardless of how little sense it made, as a way to demonstrate loyalty, were allowed to be set up. We have an entire generation of young people that were bio-enhanced and cybernetically enhanced to engage acts of sabotage on command via demonstrations of loyalty, regardless of the actual literal application of the cyber regime within which they're involved. Why would somebody intentionally do that to his own people? Unless they're not actually his own fucking people and he knew it. This is a very serious matter. Who do you consider to be your people? They said, I had a teacher once, he told me, a good man is a bad man's teacher. A bad man is a good man's teacher. So what does it mean that right now I'm in Texas and I tried to get certifications in technical skills that would be necessary for, among other things, maintaining a form of cybersecurity, including in connection with very highly technologically sophisticated paradigms around electronic security measures. And the area that, the entity that provided me with the grant did a sort of swap out within the last 3 years, wherein they coded everybody going through there to be in network with people receiving some sort of downgraded in terms of cost, by the way, and in terms of the kind of access under a legitimate security regime one could have to certain job specifications, a downgraded system of school districting connected to people literally in prison. If you're somebody that hasn't been in prison and you're trying to get these skills in order to establish a legitimate course of action and to do things for your community, well, you've been put in network with, and you've already been programmed to accept that you're not supposed to ask, and you're sure as hell not supposed to tell when they swap your identity in and out with anybody else they decide to at any time. And now you know that the people you're in network with did time in jail, and they're waiting to get out, and they've already proven their loyalty. You may not have. You may not have proven your loyalty until you spent a year getting busted down and swapped out with somebody else who committed hard crime. And then you have to keep your mouth shut while they get the job that was supposed to be yours. And then maybe at some point down the road, after you've shown your loyalty enough, I mean, maybe they'll let you work for the guy you trained before. You see, that's the point. That's what this is supposed to be about. Yeah, you taught him, and you taught him the right way. But that wasn't what it was about. See, if it's not broken, you can't fix it. So you gotta break it down, right? And that's where we're at right now. Unfortunately, breaking down and busting down didn't really get articulated. We didn't really educate people on the long-term cost associated with financially capabilitizing bust downs of everybody. Hoping what? Somehow we'd all be on an equal footing? Well, why is that man and why are the people in his network still allowed to get credit for pro bono donated legal services that haven't gone anywhere in 20 fucking years, while they also charge the rates they do for their legitimate clients to get that nice volatility, because nobody ever honored their campaign promises to do what they said they were going to do, and instead got in there and did a whole bunch of shit nobody would ever have elected him for if he said that's what he was actually going to do. I'm just saying. That's kind of where we're at today. I really thought this morning was going to be a little bit different. You know, I'm trying to keep consistent, right? See, I don't really recognize the underwriting on the accounts I just found with my identity. But the question is, do they? Or are we just not supposed to? Do you like my shirt? It's actually a jacket.